All right, welcome back to another episode of the Topwater Podcast. I'm Justin, and I'm going to do a little bit of a tournament recap of the KBF Challenge Series I was in for the month of July. Welcome back, guys and gals. It's time for another little recap. Doing some recapping of the tournament that I was just competing in. I did a little bit better in this one. A little bit better. Overall it was better. The quality of fish that I was catching, also just being able to adapt the pattern and be able to really just kind of go after a little bit bigger fish or even just a little bit better quality, I guess. I was actually getting some actual decent sized bass. I mean, we're talking, I think the biggest one I caught was 16 inches, which isn't bad. It's not a bad sized bass. It wasn't what I needed in order to get into like the top five, sort of range. I think in the top five, I would have been having to average pretty high. Let's see, fifth place. Yeah, so fifth place had 90 inches overall, which is kind of stacked. And the difference between first place and fifth place, let's see, fifth place had 90 inches even, and first place had 97.75. Those are some big numbers, some tall numbers, almost 100 inches of bass. I mean, you're talking first place, Joe Bailey. Way to go, dude. Killing it. Let's see, smallest bass was 19 inches, and the biggest bass was 21. So you're talking like that's some pretty decent sized bass right there. He's bringing in those 4s and 5s, maybe even 6s, definitely 4s. But I mean, it's kind of, and like the next guy underneath him is just a couple inches behind him with a 95.25. Smallest bass being 18 inches, largest bass being 21.25. So he ended up getting a little bit bigger of a bass, but he just didn't have the overall quality. And I think maybe he has the biggest bass of the tournament. Let's see. Bit all the way down at the end. Yep, that would be definitely Billy Reynolds. Yeah, I think that's how he's Reynolds. With 21.25. He definitely got the biggest bass of the tournament. It's looking, yeah, definitely the biggest bass. Which, congrats on that. Second place is pretty good, and plus you get the big bass of the tournament. So, way to go, dude. And then you have 93 inches even, and then underneath that you got 91.5 and then 90. That's pretty close right there. 90 and 91. I mean, you're talking just like one big bass or just a couple of upgrades there. If he would have caught the big bass of that tournament, or maybe even bumped a couple of those up just a little bit, he would have gotten fourth instead. But I ended up getting ninth, which was a top 10 finish. But I mean, then again, also at the same time, the field wasn't too deep. So as far as like competition goes, I didn't have too many people to actually compete against. The last tournament I had a little bit more competition against me, but I mean just by a few spots. I think there was 19 people in total in last month's tournament, 15 total in this month's tournament. So there's a few people, less than last month, but still, you're talking about the top, between where I was sitting at, because you have to think, I'm sitting at ninth with 73.75. So to move to move to the top 5, I would have had to make more than just 20 inches of fish. You know, I would have had to catch one whole big bass more than what I actually caught. So my average would have had to be way higher than where it's sitting at right now. But even then, I still think that the average for this month, obviously the average for this month is definitely higher than last month's average. Because last month's average was 14.05 inches. So after I averaged up all the bass, the average of each bass was about 14.05, which for my first tournament I think that's not a bad place to start. It's not the best place to start, but it's not bad. So let's see. If we got a 16-inch bass, which was the big bass of my tournament. Now, I did lose a couple of big ones that probably would have really, really helped out. Like, I lost one that was probably a good 15 inches. It was like 3 pounds. It looked like it would have been like a big bass when it grew up. It was stunted like this ways. It was heavy, but I didn't end up landing it. It ended up shaking off. But yeah, I had a 16-inch bass and then a 15.25, which the two 15-inch fish came out of flipping heavy grass next to the river channel. So that was kind of nice to actually do that. I was actually I didn't know whether or not I was going to be able to hook into anything big, but I think that should have told me where they were really sitting at, which I think next month I'm just going to kind of focus on the river more than I'm going to focus on the grass end of things, unless it gets high. Unless we start getting just an immense amount of rain and just, that's where it's going to be. The bass are going to push shallow, and they're not going to be in that sort of grassy area that I was in. So, and I mean, that's okay. That's what happens when we get high water. Just what I noticed when I got back there is it was just real low. So the water's been low, the water's been down. So I'm not really expecting the bass to be too far back up into that stuff unless we get some pretty decent sized rain, which then I would assume it would be, better to get back into those pockets and stuff like that. But other than that, I really think fishing that outside edge, finding places on the river, in deeper water, shaded areas, cover, that sort of stuff. I think that's the way to go. I think more just kind of thinking about it, really, because that was kind of the pattern that I was linking up to on the end. So I also got another 14-inch bass and a 13.5. So, which, I mean, I guess I could have just put in all the numbers. So you divide that by 5. Comes out with 14.75. So I almost hit 15 inches per bass. If I would have been able to upgrade those last couple of bass, I think I would have done much better, or at least gotten a better average. And that's really what it is about getting a better average and doing better as far as being able to locate and find bigger fish. And I was able to locate and find bigger fish towards the end of the tournament. It's just I kind of felt like it was a little bit too little, too late. I should have been doing that a little bit earlier into the month, but I was just kind of hard-headed about it and just kind of was like, I'm going to run my pattern that I'm already running. I've ran this pattern over and over and over again, and I can run it again and run it again and run it again and get a limit. But the thing is, it's not necessarily about just getting a limit, but it's about getting a limit of big bass. So instead of just trying to get a limit, you want to get a limit of big bass. So you want the biggest bass possible. I mean, I know that's the goal of every tournament, is to have just big bass after big bass after big bass. But in something like this, the opportunity of having some sort of, linking into something of decent size or something like that, I think it makes it more probable that you'll do it over the consistency of months, over the consistency of the period of time that you're fishing in. You're more likely to come across big bass. So with that being said, like, it's more important during a regular tournament just to limit out, because to limit out and get a kicker. So if you got like a 20-inch bass in a local tournament, or like a 1-day tournament or a 2-day tournament, it's better to get the number of bass rather than just the big bass. Because let's just face it, 5 bass that are, 13 inches apiece are going to beat 2 big bass that are 20 inches apiece, So if you don't catch anything else other than just 2 big bass, you might still lose, or you might not finish as high as you want to. So the accumulation of bass and the amount of inches that you actually get from having a full limit will generally be more than just having a big bass. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to get some sort of big bass or some sort of limit or something on there, or something that's going to have substantial size. Because if you have substantial size into your like live well or into your submission, then that will give you the probability of actually being able to actually win the tournament and actually, win it, be there, and, at least finish within, top 5, top 10, depending on, and it's also depending on the day. It could be just one of those days to where everybody's having a crappy day and nobody's fishing well, nobody's catching anything big or any sort of substantial size or any sort of anything like that. I mean, it's just really all about, what are you looking for? Where are you looking for them? Have you located any sort of big bass? Have you located an area that may hold some big bass? Is this something that is offshore and you're going to need electronics for it? Or is this one of those things where you're not using electronics, that you're just kind of using the bank and the way the bank looks and what you can see, and fishing the areas to where you can tell that this would hold fish? Or you basically those sorts of areas to where you don't necessarily need a depth finder in order to fish them. They're shallow enough to where you actually have targets to where you can visually see the targets. Like if you see like a piece of wood sticking out, and that you're sitting in fairly deep water, well, that's a tree. Well, stuff's going to be attached to that. There's going to be, if that's a structure or some type of cover or something like that, and you can visually see it, there's going to be fish that are somewhere around that are going to be looking to, use that for cover and also use that as an ambush point. So that's always something to be paying attention to. But there's also times to where your bigger bass are going to move off in schools. And they're going to move off in schools into deeper water, usually like humps, points, that sort of stuff. And it really helps to have some sort of electronics. Now, I don't have any electronics really rigged up on my stuff right now. I mean, I do have a Humminbird Max, Piranha Max. It's not the down imaging one. I wish I would have got the down imaging one. I think I'd be a little bit more happy with what I have if I had a down imaging. But I also don't really necessarily want to upgrade my electronics at this point. I might be especially if I'm thinking about upgrading my kayak here in the future, I might almost wait and get electronics that are for the kayak instead. The new kayak that I want to buy. Because I think in reality, some of these lakes, I'm going to need a pedal drive. Like there's definitely lakes to where I'm going to want a pedal drive. I mean, in order to fish something like Stockton, you're going to have a pedal drive. Or even when I was fishing at Fellows Lake, you don't really need a pedal drive, but man, does it help. Just to be able to maneuver against the wind, to be able to fight the wind, I mean, it just helps. It really does. And usually those kayaks usually have some sort of spot to where you can put some sort of electric outboard or some sort of trolling motor or something like that onto the back of it, or, it'd be able to house something like that. But at this point, it really doesn't make any sense for me to do just a crap ton of upgrades on mine, just so that way as I can rip them off of there and put them onto something else. And I'd rather not be just drilling my kayak full of holes just to put on something new, when I could just leave it as is, and I would have a backup kayak, or just whenever I go fish something like Springfield Lake and I know I'm going to be in the grass, I'm not going to take a pedal drive kayak out into like lily pads and grass and stuff like that. Now, maybe if I know I'm going up the river, that might be a good idea to do that, because the river is deep enough. There's not as much debris, or, well, there's not as much shallow water, grass, to where I have to really worry about it getting stuck into my props or breaking off my prop somewhere. It's usually deep enough water to where I can usually manage it. I'm not usually scraping up on stuff. The only time I ever seem to scrape up on stuff when I'm in my kayak is generally when I'm having to deal with something to where it causes me not to have to focus on, like, steering the kayak. And that's another thing, is with a pedal drive kayak, I would actually be able to maneuver the kayak while I'm fishing. So I'd be able to, as I'm working a bait, I can maintain where I'm at. And, I can kind of keep the position of the kayak where I need it to be. Whereas right now, I'm having a hard time doing that, because whenever I have to maneuver the kayak, especially in heavier winds, like the last time I went out, I ended up fishing for a little bit, but it comes back. One of the troubles of having a kayak is you're constantly fighting the wind. And if you're constantly fighting the wind, you're not fishing. That's really what it is. And so a lot of times I have to anchor down. Well, if you're anchoring down constantly, you're throwing this anchor down that hits the bottom, makes a shit ton of noise. So in order for you to anchor off, you have to anchor, which makes noise, and then you have to sit there for a while, which if you're pressed for time, then you're going to have to sit there and wait for about 15 minutes. Generally, what I find is I usually don't anchor down into any sort of rock. Now, if it's mud, it's a little bit different. If it's mud, you can kind of just like slip it down. But the majority of the time, especially if it's high wind, I want to get that anchor down fast. Just because if it's high wind, I don't want to be pushed off the spot I'm in. So the slower you let that anchor down, it's going to hit the bottom and be more gentle, but you're going to move off your spot more. So you're not going to be in the same position that you originally wanted to be. So that means you need to start dropping the anchor before you even get to that position. So by the time you get to that position, your anchor hits. And if you drop it too hard, you're making a shit ton of noise in the water. I mean, when that thing hits the bottom, it's going to be like, dunk. That's a noise. That's a substantial noise. And if you're already talking about high-pressured fish or something like that, or maybe they're in a lethargic mood, they're not going to be having that. And the big bass aren't going to be having that either. So, and that's kind of what I've figured out is I tend to catch bigger bass when I'm not anchoring off all the time. But that also being said, if I anchor off on a spot and I sit there and just fish it methodically and I fish it for a good 30 minutes, then I'll catch a bass. There's a pretty decent chance I'll catch a bass, by doing something. Because, you're talking about changing from, reaction baits to baits that are more presentation oriented, to Texas rig, to jig, to topwater. I'll go through the gambit. I'll go through the whole entire thing in order to be able to figure out what exactly I need to be throwing at that sort of point in time. But even then, it's still kind of, dealer's choice when it comes down to it, because, like the last time I went, I was catching them off of pretty much everything, well, not everything. I was catching them off of a Texas rig creature bait. I was catching them off the Rage Bug, the Strike King Rage Bug, and I was catching them off the Strike King Rage Swimmer, the bigger size. I think it was the 4.75. I bought some 5/0 hooks of the Underspin owner Flashy Swimmer, paired up with the the Rage Swimmer. I paired them up with that, and that's what I ended up catching that 16-inch bass off of. I caught it by bumping it in to some wood, popping it over the top, and it just smashed it. And that's where a lot of my bites came from, was reaction sort of style bites. So it wasn't like they were just feeding. They didn't want something just lazily swimming along. They wanted something that they could react to. So that meant that most of my fishing was, fairly quick, like fairly quick fishing, or like really erratic fishing, which even then that died down. So, but by the time that bite sort of kind of died down, that reaction sort of bite, what I should have done is I should have went to some sort of worm or some sort of worm type setup, but I didn't really. At that point, it was already kind of getting late. I was already kind of need to get off the water, and so instead of just switching, I just kind of fished my way back. And of course, if you watch the last episode, I actually cover all of this. So I think paying attention to those things, and it's always, and you have to pay attention to the adjustments that you made, because I think really what it is I need to look for the signs and pay attention to the signs. If I see signs of water level drop, I need to pull out and then fish the outside. That's what I need to do. Now, if it's signs of water rising, and I notice that there hasn't been a drop in water level, then that's when I need to push the bank. When that's when I definitely need to be watching for shallow water opportunities, or bank, or fishing close to the bank, fishing those sorts of spots, because that's where the opportunity of actually catching fish are probably going to be the highest, is especially when there's water rushing in. But unfortunately, it's kind of the slump of summer. We're getting storms-ish. They're isolated storms. It's not like spring rain to where it's just rain, and the water's just rising. It's just you get this small pocket of intensity, and then that's it. So you're not getting like massive water dumps throughout the whole entire region. You're just getting these isolated pockets of severe weather. So that's not really causing the water to really rise too much. It's actually, and plus with it being as hot as it is right now, I mean, you got to think that a lot of that's evaporating off of there. So there's probably a lot of evaporation, and just kind of the cycle continues like that. And that's probably the way it's going right now. And that's not causing the water levels to really rise. So because of that, I just kind of think right now is not the greatest time to be fishing straight up on the bank, in my opinion. So I've kind of like had to like take a step off of that, and just to make sure that I keep going through the pattern in order to like really be able to hone in on where the bass are at and be able to be successful. Because now with this next tournament, I had to be able to beat 14.75, so 14 3/4. So that means I need to be able to get an average of 15 inches. 15 inches is the goal, like having an average of 15 inches. So that means any fish that's under 15 inches, I'm not trying to necessarily measure those. So anything under 14 inches, I'm probably going to just throw back until the end of the month. The last week of the month. Anything under 14 is going to get tossed back. So I'm not even. I may what I'll do is I'll put a couple of 13-inch fish, like I'll put 2 of them into my live well. So that way is just in case, you know, that I have to submit these to where it's like, okay, like in order to get a limit, I got to put these 2 13-inch fish because I'm gonna try to place as high as I can. That's really gonna be. I'm just gonna stick them in the live well for me. But as far as going and measuring and what I'm actually going to submit to the leaderboard, I'm going to only submit 14 and above. So 14 and above is the only things that are going to get submitted. Honestly, I want to say 14 and a half and above. So I think that's really where I'm going to be focusing on is 14 and a half and above. That seems a little bit undoable at this point, or a little bit out of reach, but I think that's going to be the one to go. Or maybe to really test myself, to only submit anything that's 15 and above. So that means that would start putting me into the, let's see, right here, that 7th place. Yeah, 7th place was the first angler to have 15 and above. So that's the closest place to me, and he finished with 80.5. So that would be breaking the 70s mark. And I think that's really the goal, is to get out of the 70s for the next tournament and break into the 80s. So if I can catch 15 inches and above, because I think with 15, if we go 15 times 5, well, 15 times 5, so if I caught 5 15-inch fish, it would be 75 inches. So that's kind of the goal, 75. I think 75 is the goal, which still wouldn't have beat the 8th place guy, which still wouldn't have beat the guy ahead of me, but what it would do is it would raise my average. So that's really going to be the goal for this next month, is to not put anything that's under 15 inches onto the leaderboard. So that's going to be my target size. And I think this next upcoming month, I'm probably going to end up just really focusing on really focusing on more of the more of the river side, more of that sort of stuff, because it seemed like I always had a little bit better luck actually in the James River more than I had into the lake. Like I get bit, my size is bigger. I get bigger size into the river than I do the lake. So I think this next month, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the river more than I'm going to focus on the lake. Also, I still want to go and try out more Fellows Lake. I really just haven't been going out there. And I think that's really has more to do with just time. Like, it's a little bit further away. It's a little bit more of a paddle, and I've just kind of been crammed for time, and I've really only had like one day to really be able to do it, to get out there and get after it. But, we'll see. We'll see with this next month. But this next month, I think I'll do even better than I did this month, just because I think this month I really started honing in on my actual strategy that I should be implementing and actually be going, trying to do a better job with it. But yeah, so that's kind of the plan for this next month, is to do that. And also coming up, I'm going to be doing some striper fishing this week, which is going to be interesting. It's going to be a nice little change from just doing all this bass fishing and doing all that sort of type of stuff. I also thought about maybe trying to do a little bit more catfishing or something like that, or maybe actually going out to Fellows Lake and actually doing some walleye fishing and actually getting down on some of that. That would be actually pretty fun. Go and smash some walleye and, that sort of fun thing. I mean, I know I caught one out there not too long ago, I caught a nice 18.5-inch walleye, which would have been great to put in to the leaderboard. Didn't get the chance to do it because it's not a bass. Oh well. But I think I can actually hammer home on some decent sized bass here on the James River and here in Springfield Lake. I think I can do some pretty decent damage. I think if I just make sure I don't make the mistakes I did the last time and letting the big ones get away and letting making amateur mistakes and rookie mistakes and allowing the big ones to get off. And the big one is I think I just need to get a new net because my old net's torn up and it has huge holes and I'm not really comfortable trying to net a big fish into it. I just need to get a new net with the rubber net, like instead of the that sort of neoprene, well, not neoprene, but it's that net material. It's that ropey net material, that synthetic net sort of stuff. Treble hooks just seem to get caught into it. I mean, I threw when I had to cut it all out. I caught a 4-pound bass off of a jerk bait, and I netted it, and man, was it just... It was a nightmare trying to get that thing out. I think I spent like 30 minutes just trying to get it out. Then I just cut it out. And that was the only way I could get that jerk bait out of that net. So instead of getting a net to where my jerk bait's just going to get extremely hung into it and just, to where I'm never going to get it back unless I cut through the net, I think I'm going to have to go with a rubber net, some sort of rubber mesh. Something like that, just because that other net material, I mean, it's good for like single hooks and that sort of thing. If it was like a jig hook or if it was, like any sort of single type of hook, it would have been it's just fine for that. But once you start getting into treble hooks and those sorts of things, oh, it's such a pain in the butt. It's a pain in the butt, and I just don't want to deal with it. And I just need to get a new one. Because I think I lost a couple of fish this time around. If I would have had a net, I wouldn't have lost these fish. And that's really what it comes down to. If I had a net, I wouldn't have lost a couple of these fish. Whereas right now, I think because of the fact that I don't have a net, I'm actually having to put my hands at risk whenever it comes down to treble hook baits, and I'm just not really willing to get hooked that much in my fingers, especially with jerk baits, and it's so I mean, and that just comes in handy, especially when you have something skin hooked, because that's the way that one fish got off. It was skin hooked, it was up against the boat, and it just thrashed and it came off, and it was just, I knew it was coming off. It was one of those things. It's like, oh, this thing is barely hooked and it is thrashing around, and it's gonna come off if it just if it bucks a little bit too hard or in the right direction, it's coming off, and it did, and it came off. And it was like, crap. Because that one would have definitely got rid of that 13.5-inch bass for sure. I would have definitely been sitting a wee bit higher. Probably not. I wouldn't be sitting necessarily in a higher position. I would have been still sitting in the same position that I am now, but I would have had a bit bigger average. And that's really what it is, and that's really my goal from month to month, is really just to keep beating my average, to keep beating that average. Because if I keep beating that average, I'm going to move up the ranks naturally. Unless there's 10 people and 10 of them are everybody who placed higher than me, which there wasn't anybody higher than me. There wasn't 10 people. There was only 8. But I digress. It's so it's kind of an exciting time doing these tournaments, and I feel good about getting in there and competing and doing that sort of stuff. So it's going to be kind of it's going to be nice to see what happens in this next tournament, this next up and coming tournament, because I just think that I could probably, I really do think that this next tournament I could probably break in somewhere into the top 5. I I want to break into the top 5. That's what I want to do. I want to break into the top 5. I want to actually do well. I want to place well, And if I just keep this sort of just constant upgrading, this constant just improvement, if I just keep improving and I force myself to keep improving, then eventually I'm going to break into that top 5. I'm going to eventually get there. I just got to keep doing it. I just got to keep honing my skills. I got to keep adapting. I got to keep paying attention. And I think that's the bigger thing is I'm paying attention-ish, but I'll see something and kind of ignore it. And I need to not do that anymore. Like, I'll see a water line and just kind of ignore it. Maybe they might be back here. And just to go, hey, look, I can see that the water's dropped. They're probably not going to be back into a pocket. They're probably going to be on the outside of this pocket, or they're going to be out on the outside edges where there's going to be access to deep water or deeper water. So I think that's really what it's going to be, and that's really where I'm going to focus my main, bit of fishing is more out into the river and more up into the river. And just kind of fishing that channel, and just making sure that I'm hitting the spots that I think that these fish are actually going to be in. And I've also had a lot better luck up into the river with stuff like square bills and crankbaits and stuff like that. And jerkbaits as well. Usually I have a little bit clearer water, so jerkbaits actually kind of work a little bit better up into the river than they do out into the lake. Lake tends to get really muddied, but there's a lot of mud in the lake, and when the wind starts kicking up, it's kind of hard, That, and also everything's being pushed into that spot, and if the wind's blowing right, you're getting a lot of turbulence, you get a lot of churning. So I think actually moving up into the river and moving fairly decently up the river, I think what I want to do is to go up as far as I can through some of the rapids, and I may have to do a little bit of wading, but that could be an okay thing to do. I might be okay with wading through some rapids, but it's summertime. I should wade through some rapids anyways. It's not that big of a deal. Maybe throw on some old pair of shoes or something. I got a pair of river shoes that I can use. That's probably what I'll do. Or maybe just go and get me a pair of river shoes. That also might not be a bad way to go too. So might just think about doing that. But I'm going to leave you with this, is the fact that, hey, just get out there and go fishing. It doesn't pay just to sit in here and, be on a couch and just, watch videos all day. It might be entertaining for a little bit, but it's nothing like going out there and actually creating memories and actually being able to, experience fishing, experience nature, experience the outdoors, getting out there and just actually being able to immerse yourself is just, it's very therapeutic and soothing, but at the same time, it can be exhilarating and it can be fun. It's not, it's more than just whatever. It's more than just relaxation. It's also, there's a mental game. There's you're figuring out shit. It's this whole like interactive ecosystem of things going on that you have to pay attention to, and sometimes it can be frustrating, but sometimes it's just kind of blissful and nice, and sometimes you just kind of hate yourself for being out there, and other times you just can't think of anywhere else to be. It's just, that's what it is. It is what it is, and I don't really have to tell you guys, how cool it is. You guys can find it out for yourself. That's what it is. That's what it's about. It's about figuring it out for yourself. It's about getting out there and getting after it. It's about, not making the excuse to sit on your couch and just, oh, well, I'll go out next time. Yeah, it's really hot today. I better go out. No. Go out. Have some fun. Take some water with you. Make sure you're staying hydrated. Make sure you're eating food. Stay up on those vitamins. Keeping that vitamin regimen going. Get some exercise. If if that's the only form of exercise that you're getting is going fishing, then you need to go fishing more. Get out there and get on a kayak, strap up that backpack, do some bank fishing, just get after it. That's what life is about. Life isn't about stagnation. It's about motivating yourself in order to push yourself in areas that you don't think that you're going to be successful in, and to push yourself to be successful at things that you're not successful, because that's a skill. Life is just a set of skills that you're just trying to master, and skill after skill, mastery after mastery, your life slowly improves and gets better over the course of time. And just remember, don't try to compare yourself to somebody else. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday. You just motivate yourself to be better than who you were yesterday. That's really what it is, and that's what I try to do. I try to be better than what I was the day before, just like in these tournaments. I'm just trying to be better this tournament than I was the last tournament. I may not be trying to beat number one, and I want to be number one, that's for sure. I want to be the best, but also at the same time, I also know that what it comes down to is you just have to be better than yourself. Be better than, you. Just do better. Just do better, Yeah, that's the best advice in the world. But just try to be better than what you have done before. So, and that's how you improve. You just figure out a way to do it better than what you've done before. And if you did a shitty job the first time, well, hey, guess what? All you have to do is a half-assed job this time, and you're doing better. And then the next time after that, just do a whole-ass time, But and just improve over the period of time, and that's really what it comes down to. It's just improvement. To not allow yourself to become stagnant at a certain point, but just to constantly improve, and to constantly recognize whenever you start to hit that plateau, that plateau or that roof, once you bust through that roof, that now you've created a new floor. So then just go to the next. So I hope that helps you a little bit. Maybe it helps to motivate you a little bit in order to get outside. Maybe it helps you to motivate in order to maybe get in a little bit better shape, getting a little bit of exercise, maybe eat a little bit healthier so that way you can get out more often. Anything to get you out on the water or out on the bank. Put a fishing pole in your hand and a line in the water. I mean, that's really what I want to motivate you guys to do, is just go out there and throw those baits around. Make the mistakes. It's okay. So just get out there, get after it, and I'll see you out on the water. Peace.